would like to thank the previous panel, which really introduced us to the interactions between the government and the industry in this particular brave new world of quantum. In this panel, we're going to specialize on the post-quantum cryptography, and I have two experts here with me, Denis Mandich and Erik. I cannot really pronounce your name, but Erik Hieta-Aho. Yes. I'd like them to introduce themselves. I am Boulat. I'm an associate professor at the University of Arizona in the Electrical Computer Engineering Department. And my specialty is on quantum security. So, Denis, why don't you introduce yourself? And
sure.
Then
Denis Mandich. You sort of throat talking a lot this week. I'm a physicist by background, but I spent 20 years in the intelligence community. Saw a lot of the things that we're talking about, threats, technologies, and so on from the government side. And I've been in private industry for the last decade. Founded Crypt with the idea that we could bring a much higher level of security to cybersecurity infrastructure and stop a lot of the IP theft that we saw coming out of China over the years.
Hello, I'm Erik Hieta-Aho. I'm a researcher at VTT, which is a research center in Finland. My background is I'm a mathematician by training. I did my PhD in error-corrected coding theory, and now I've fallen into the realm of PQC and the transition that needs to come about. And it's very much in brief, at least.
all right. Well, the way that this is going to run is I'll be watching the audience. If any of you have questions or follow-up comments, definitely don't hesitate to raise your hand up. I will see you. But I'll get started. So we have heard earlier this morning about various problems that quantum approach is going to address, specifically in security, and this panel is on security. And something that was mentioned is this collect now, decrypt later problem. I think that actually both President Trump's advisor to science mentioned this on video, as well as one of the companies, I forget which one, I don't want to single anybody out, mentioned this. And the obvious question is, how can quantum and PQC approaches especially help, if they can actually help on this? So maybe Denis can talk to that first, being from a company that implements these solutions, and like to hear what, and then maybe Erik.
Yeah, harvest now and decrypt later is, a century-old technique where you collect data that you know is strongly encrypted and looking to find flaws in the implementation, the software, the randomness generation mechanism, or a brute force attack against the algorithms. So that goes back to the Venona program from during the Cold War. This is all public knowledge stuff. It continues today. And we've seen it on a scale in the last 10 or 15 years that we've never experienced before, because the cost of storing that data is approaching zero, and the potential value for being able to decrypt it in the future is enormous for many nation states. The bad news is that PQC alone does not solve the harvest now, decrypt later problem. I hate to bring that to you, but if what we saw happen with Psych, the other finalist candidate for PQC standardization by NIST, happens to Kyber, now MLChem, anybody who harvested that data in the future can now decrypt it. And Psych was broken with a laptop computer. We have no mathematical proof that MLChem will not break in the future, or that there won't be massive implementation problems, errors in coding and so on that won't break it. So we have to move on now to something a little bit stronger. PQC is the minimum that you must do. We must transition off RSA. The government, if you're in a compliance industry, mandates that's done by 2035. I think that's really ambitious, considering we're not done with the last cryptographic transition that started 20 years ago. We're 60% of the way there on that. And that was when the internet and data infrastructure was in its infancy. So this is going to be a long-term problem. We need to bring much more to bear against it. The same security protocols, TLS and so on, that secure cat videos on YouTube cannot be what we secure our most sensitive financial and health record data.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and it's been around in general. Implementation of cryptography is already a challenge in its own right. And PQC is at least one possible solution. It does have its risks, but the risks are probably higher if there is no PQC implemented. So you have to kind of analyze your risk and weigh the benefits and determine how critical your data is. And it's all about time, right? And so it's a balancing act. PQC is one of the tools that we have available. Denis may be kind of alluding to other options. QKD's option. There's hybridness as well. That's another aspect of mitigating risk. That's possible protocols that are being standardized in IPsec and in various forms of different types of hybrid methods. And when people talk about hybrid, there's many definitions that are thrown around. One of which that I'm kind of talking about is where you have PQC and a traditional, say, elliptic curve algorithm in combination to secure your systems. So that kind of like mitigates, in a sense of the security of whether if PQC algorithms get broken due to the mathematical just infrastructure, like the way that the mathematics is broken before even quantum computers are around, then you still have your traditional algorithms to secure you. So there's a few different aspects that need to be taken into account, and it's all about kind of risk mitigation heavily.
It's interesting that you mention risk mitigation rather than, risk resolution almost. There is so, and you mentioned quantum key distribution. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the quantum key distribution has been a very popular topic of academic research. It has been invented in 1984, and since then there have been dozens of protocols that have been constructed by mostly academics. On the government side, it has fallen largely out of favor in this country because of various implementation challenges, as well as just the cost of it. US decided to go with the PQC route rather than the QKD route. Do you think, and this is going to be a proactive question, do you think that was a mistake? And is there a value to having kind of more of a more, not emphasis, but at least input from the QKD side, kind of quantum cryptography side?
Well, the good news is for QKD that lots of companies and industries are going to implement it regardless of NSA's objections to it. They're already building this for some of the banks that are our clients. The connectivity issue and the other threat vectors against QKD are insurmountable. The fact that you still need classical infrastructure to use it is NSA's main objection to it, and it amounts to another single point of failure, which is not your endpoint. You still need to get those keys from a physics appliance to your cell phone, your laptop, or wherever where you can use it. But there's absolutely a role for QKD. It has very different security parameters, has very good use cases for it. For example, connecting data centers with black fiber, QKD endpoints. These are perfectly valid solutions for places where you wouldn't use TLS or some variant of PQC. Of course, China has built out the largest network in the world. Russia's doing the same thing. There's lots of activity in Europe around it. So it's just a matter of time before we see more of it in the US. We have a company here that's building the first generation of quantum repeaters and quantum memory that will overcome some of those distance problems with it. But remember, those networks are not used to transmit data. They're only used for keys. You still need the regular internet to transmit the encrypted data that QKD relies on. So it's a solution for some classical problems, and it's going to work really well. It will be built, but it's not everything. So.
Yeah, I agree. QKD is very much use case specific. There's very specific niche areas that it's going to be practical. I could see financial industry being one of them. I know in Europe that's been some of the use cases that have been started to be implemented. When the distances aren't ginormous, that makes it practical for, say, two banks or a bank with multiple locations to basically share keys within its own network. When you kind of have QKD is I'd say from my perspective, I'm not that's not my area of research, but from what I've understood is it's a good system for an internal secure measure within a entity of its own. So like when you bank with two different locations, that's a good way to secure communications between them. But you're still going to require classical communication security, so you're still going to need PQC in some context, no matter what.
Well, that's QKD and NPQC. They all started out in academic environment. I mean, PQC. I think the initial impetus for developing it was the vulnerability of the elliptic curve, as well as the it's related the discrete log and the factoring problem to quantum computers. But even before that, for those who are familiar with the history, not familiar with history, there was these interesting mathematical problems on lattices that essentially were easy enough to be solved on average case, but in the hard cases were really difficult. They were in NP hard category. At least that was what was the hypothesis. So all of this was born out of academia, which is where I'm from. And this is my first time attending this conference. I'd like to have these gentlemen tell me how would you envision kind of academic and industry and government interaction, this triumvirate of, I think, progress that is driving this country forward and our allies forward as well. We have a democratic government here, and part of the democracy is having academia that's being heard and also input into the security and engineering perspective. So why don't you talk about how would you envision the academics contributing to the problem of kind of making PQC and just encryption update in general happen?
Well, from my perspective, first of all, there's no quantum industry without academia. All the biggest technologies came out of academia. Superconducting Josephson junctions came out of Yale back in the 1960s, or Cambridge, and then transmon qubits. I think I saw the IBM people here. That's a 1970s technology, also out of Yale. And those things made absolutely no sense to come out of the startup community. You would never have had any basis for getting funding to commercialize something like that back then. So although it's popular to believe, I lived out in California for 8 years, I heard this every day, the VC community and the startup community can solve all these problems. It's just absurd. There's no way that anyone would have researched the shortest vector problem that we're talking about, all the different types of superconducting qubits. That just would never have happened without government funding for academia, national labs, government research facilities. And virtually almost any of the technologies that you use today, I'll give you dozens of examples. Google Street View, that was technology that was funded by the CIA through In-Q-Tel because they needed it for their own purposes. There wouldn't have been a reason in the 1990s for Google to have come up with that. They just acquired it and incorporated it into maps. So although we see funding drying up for lots of industries, rightfully so, we've wasted a lot of money in this country on nonsense. Quantum is not one of those things because we will not be able to compete globally without that federal level and state level funding for academia, basic research that we don't know how it pays off in the future. And the cryptographic piece is no different. A lot of the research that goes into cryptography never results in a commercial product. There's no way to make money on it. And the NIST requirement for the standards process was that there are no patents on this. Everyone can use this crypto to secure their infrastructure. If that was all patented, and as some of them were in the beginning, no one would be able to afford to use it, and they would go to a lower level of free security, which is a typical story in cybersecurity. So we do need this to come out of academia and to not be a commercial interest of any one company, whether it's the big Silicon Valley companies, foreign companies, it doesn't matter. It has to be publicly available and easily accessible by everyone.
Yeah, it's very much true that these new algorithms really did come out of academia heavily. Like a lot of the entities, a lot of the papers that were published, there were companies in there as well. I mean, IBM is one of them, but there was also academics along the way throughout all of them, the mathematicians. Funny enough, my background as a mathematician, I'm a researcher in a research center, but I came out of academia myself, had studied lattice theory, lattices, and coding theory is what it's described as. These research topics, they're very much abstractions. They're from abstract mathematics. But then in 2016, this competition came about by NIST. All these areas that I had studied for years are all of a sudden relevant and being implemented in cryptography. And so it's quite it's a balancing act for sure. We always need to have academia and industry and governance to essentially to ensure the trust of our systems. And that's one of the main reasons why we can really trust our communication systems, is that through this openness in the process. And that's, I guess, one of the reasons why I really liked how NIST has run this PQC competition. And there's definitely controversial topics that came about during the competition, but still it's been relatively open. And
it had to be. No one would trust the algorithms if they were secret or proprietary. And NSA's golden rule is don't roll your own crypto. Everything should be open to public scrutiny.
Well, there is the kind of the guiding principle of secure system design is that your system has to be completely open. It's the keys that have to be protected, and the less you protect, the better your overall. There's less points of vulnerability. So you kind of want to amplify this protection. But I think all of us know this in this room. Switching tacks a little bit. So we talked about hybrid approaches. We talked about the kind of interplay between the elliptic curves and PQC and quantum key distribution, QKD. The more or less accepted infrastructure for the current internet, TLS and whatnot, is you transmit a key using a public key infrastructure, and then there is a symmetric key, which is usually AES. Can you talk about how this would play with the post-quantum world, and whether post-quantum even, what kind of sense does it make to consider here?
Well, the government has told us that they will not support hybrid solutions where you stack RSA with MLChem or Kyber. And there's a really fundamental reason for that. Although you think you get more security, there's an old saying in the intelligence community, complex systems breaking complex ways. If you stack these things together, there are going to be a lot of things that go wrong that will probably break your security unless you get it perfect. And we know from the exploits done by all the big players that we see every year at Black Hat, we see them published in CEVs almost every week now, that happens all the time. So adding complexity is generally a weakening of your security, unless somehow magically you've done it perfectly. The other part of the algorithms is that many of them will not work on older infrastructure. You can't swap these algorithms out on monolithic applications. You just have to rewrite the whole thing from the very beginning. And that's going to be a challenge that's going to take 10 plus years. And in many cases, the people that wrote these programs, that worked on these things years ago, they're gone. They retired, they moved on to their jobs. So it's going to be a heavy lift for a lot of companies, and it's going to be very expensive and very time consuming. And I don't imagine that it'll be done within a decade. What's the other part of the question about hybrid? I forgot. Oh, AES. Yeah, this is the other kind of silly thing that you see all the time in Wired magazine or whatever. Asymmetric algorithms and RSA, and we still have AES, and so we're good on the symmetric. Almost all AES keys are transmitted with the RSA and elliptical curves today through TLS and IPsec tunnels and so on. So the fact that you're transmitting them using a quantum broken or even classically broken mechanism doesn't make you any more secure. AES keys are only as secure as the mechanism by which you distributed them. And for some of the banks that we deal with, they literally do it in a key ceremony by hand. They don't transmit them using public key infrastructure. So sure, if you did all that, you did it right. You still have to use AES 256 because Grover's algorithm using quantum computers reduces the strength of AES 256 down to 128 bits. So that will get deprecated. And we've heard here informally that we'll go to AES 512 in the coming years. I don't know if you have any insights into that. But don't fall into the trap that we're good because we still have AES. That's not good. Virtually every transaction you do online, every HTTPS session, every signal or iMessage chat you do uses that asymmetric piece to establish the AES keys.
Yeah, it's very much true. At least it's kind of good that the TLS and HTTPS and these things will most likely be updated. They're working on it, at least in the Internet Task Force. So the standards are coming for TLS to be updated to include various protocols. I'm not fully certain if it's only going to be hybrid things or there's a way to choose. We'll find out, I guess. But it is true that AES, you're going to have to extend your keys. You have to either double the key size. I haven't quite heard the 512 thing, but unless there's been a new paper possibly optimized. I thought Grover's couldn't be optimized more, but maybe there's something else. I have heard,
Grover's is optimal already.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't be improved upon.
Right. But I've also heard of talks of using quantum walks as a way of, but I don't know if it's more optimal than Grover's yet in terms of random search. So,
To my knowledge, quantum walks are not proven to be either because it's
what did you say?
they're not proven to be either optimal. They don't. There's no provable advantage to them. I mean, they work in certain cases,
Okay. Yeah.
but right. No, this is very interesting, somewhat disturbing to me because then, as somebody who does not like to upgrade the technology too much, I guess I'm going to have to. Now, this has been mostly focused on the US. Now, you mentioned the Internet Task Force. Do you think that internationalization of these algorithms, we're talking about NIST, NIST that, NIST that, but Europe has their own centers. They have their own standards bodies. Heck, they use metric system, and here we use the old imperial system. How would international interplay here would how would affect deployment of the whole new ecosystem for encryption?
I think everything has to be interoperable. Almost every place around the world has to work with any algorithms that we're using today. The older and the post-quantum ones. Companies like Cloudflare, they're global. They're supporting that infrastructure everywhere. The other piece, for example, I think you're maybe referencing like BSI. They are standardizing a stronger version of MLChems called FrodoChem, which we liked and we had hoped that they would bring it here, but they didn't. So they'll have better security and better encryption, which anyone's doing business with BSI in Germany might have to adopt. I don't know, but the foundational piece will be what NIST standardized. Of course, China has their own standard that will not be interoperable. But if they're doing business outside of China, Europe, US, they will have to comply with the NIST and ETSI kind of joint standards for all those technologies. But internally, the intelligence community, there's two suites of tools that we use classically in the US government. One was the secret algorithms that were not published and how they worked or what the security levels of them were. And then all the public ones, AES, RSA, and so on. That same thing will happen in every country around the world. They have their own secret technologies that they use for communications to their embassies around the world, among their law enforcement, security. But the average stuff that you do with banks and healthcare and so on will all be international standards, in my opinion. But that could change.
Yeah, it's going to have a general consensus worldwide if they want to do business worldwide. That's one of the main things. South Korea is another country that has different standards as well coming, but to have secure communications around the world, they're going to most likely have to follow NIST or whatever they end up doing with TLS and these standards at the Internet Engineering Task Force. ETSI as well, I believe, is following NIST, but I believe they also have hybrid, if I remember correctly. It's been a minute since I followed exactly their processes, but yeah, it's been an interesting dynamic. I'm in Finland, and we've had discussions in Finland internally, like trying to understand what is going to necessarily happen there. They're definitely following NIST, and in the public domain, they'll follow NIST, but also have to consider everything in European standard levels as well. So I'm really interested to see how it fully plays out in the coming years.
I think the Finns and many of the Europeans contributed. Those researchers, actually ML Chem and Kyber came out of IBM's facility in Switzerland. Those are mostly European international researchers. So I think that's what gave people the confidence that, hey, this should be something, this is our communications language globally. It's not just an American NIST standard. They're just the people that happen to run the competition.
Yes, I would like to think that the strongest standard will prevail, just like California leads the way with emission standards on cars, and now all the cars have the compatible emission standards to California's, and thus there's less pollution in the world overall, which is I think it's a great thing. I hope that this is going to happen here as well. We have a couple of minutes left. I would like to ask the audience, do any of you have questions, comments to the panelists? Yes, right there, please.
Hello. Thanks so much for the discussion today. I'm Morgan. I'm a researcher at the Center for New American Security. I was wondering if you could expand on the topic of China adopting their own algorithms and how that would play out globally, especially when we started getting into standardization. Thank you.
It's a long story, but as you probably are aware, the Chinese government, the CCCP, must have total transparent visibility into all communications inside China. They're extending that to the near abroad, of course. So the motivation for their technology is not just securing themselves externally, but making a lot of that encrypted traffic that would normally be unbreakable available to the government for monitoring there. So I don't see it being adopted in many places, except, for example, you're selling Huawei gear, you're getting it for free in your country for the first few years, but there's a cost to that, which is they get to see everything on that infrastructure. And part of that is knowing how those algorithms work and are implemented. There's many cautionary tales on this where the perfect versions of crypto that you see deployed in technology worldwide ended up being backdoored. I think every country in the world has done this. Etsy's famous one is called Tetraburst. They lowered the key length on many of the protocols that were used in radio communications and sensor systems. There's famous ones from the US and elsewhere. All those things on the Chinese side will be implemented because of their laws within that country, that if you're a foreign entity working there, they must be able to see your transmissions back and forth. You can't use end-to-end encrypted signal protocol, for example, in China without the government having access to it. So that's a lot of the motivation for what they're doing there.
Great question.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you know anything about the algorithms they've chosen?
Yeah, they did a lattice-based algorithm as well. It looks strong, but like I said, when you don't know what the flaws are in some of these, so let's say, I'll give you an example. So this is all public now, but if you Google crypto AG, the Washington Post did an amazing expose on it. It was a perfectly secure cryptographic device that was deployed for decades. The CIA owned the company. Worked perfectly well, and all they did was compromise the key space for the crypto system. A very strong crypto system, poor key space. Now you can guess the 1 million possible key combinations and do real-time encryption. When you introduce something like that algorithmically into the protocols, whether it's Kyber or any of the other like HQC and so on, you have no way of really knowing. Even when you're doing statistical analysis on the key space, it will pass all the statistical testing that NIST has approved. You can only tell if something is bad, not if it's good. And that's the flaw that these entities around the world have exploited. You've probably read all the ones from Black Hat, that the free software that you got to use for doing encryption or file transfer on GitHub was actually made by XYZ Intel agency many years later to be found out. So I expect a lot more of that to happen.
All right, I think that we're unfortunately out of time. Thank you very much for the panelists participating, and thank you for you guys being here, and have a great rest of the conference.